I know her.
She's
I went
from
to school with
Bosnia.
yeah, I went to school with her.
Okay,
We
yeah,
I
yes,
did
exactly.
we went to Dawson together and we
Oh,
did
yes.
one of my first video projects I did with Eva like
Really?
100 years ago.
She's great.
Yeah. She's fucking amazing.
So, like,
Shout out
she's
to
just so
Eva.
inspired, yeah, for sure, and she's
Yeah.
just so, like I just love, like, a hard-hitting like, just, "This is my opinion, and I believe it 100%, and, yeah, you can challenge me on it, but I'm still gonna" like, you know what I mean? Like, I just love that
Not
in
oh yeah,
people.
not unf I wonder why. Yeah, not
Yeah.
unfamiliar.
Yeah,
Not an
yeah.
unfamiliar territory for us. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. I don't really care about like general introduction things. I'm just
Mhm.
gonna focus on what you said about the kids.
Okay,
So
great.
when you said your kids, so
Mhm.
you, I mean,
My students.
I
Yeah.
know you. I've
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
researched you also, but I still am like, what does Melina do? Like,
Yeah.
so you could say you're like an educator, a teacher, but you also run programs. And also, I
Yeah,
feel
so
like
yeah.
you're saving the world. So you could
Yeah.
just explain that. Yeah, your
I
kids.
think yeah, I think the easiest way to frame it is that I'm like an environmental educator consultant. So like
Okay.
I go into the schools and then provide specialized programming, and that could either be with the students directly or with the educators themselves, like trying to get them closer to understanding their connection with nature, so that they can relay that message. So like I went to school for environmental ethics
Okay.
and environmental anthropology. Um, and while I was learning all this kind of stuff about the world ending or how the world is fucked, it was very discouraging. It was kind of
Yeah.
like, okay, sick, like we have 50 years, and then I was working at this nature camp and I was like, oh, I think the only way, and I didn't come to this conclusion myself. I think a lot of delving into or understanding um, First Nations understanding of environmental education or the environment itself also has helped me form my opinion or my worldview. But I think the only thing that really works in terms of, in my humble opinion, in terms of like conservation, um, not maybe the only thing, but one of the things I think is very important is for people to develop their own relationship with nature so that they have a point of view or perspective to care about.
Yeah.
So like when you're talking about these kind of like overarching climate change and population densities and whatever, all that kind of stuff, capitalism, all these kind of huge topics, it's hard to feel connected to it. But if you go outside and feed some birds, or if you go outside and build a garden and watch it grow, or take a hike or something that's a little bit more tangible, then you start building connections that you actually care about. You start actually forming a relationship with the natural world and the things in it. And that makes you care. That's
Yeah.
that's it, ultimate. So that's kind of my job. My job is basically to make people care about the environment through connecting with their inner child, if I'm talking to an educator, connecting with nature, and then I also use it as, like, an intervention and prevention tool for behavior management issues. So, my humble opinion is, like, if a kid's acting up, it's probably the system itself that they're not, really connecting with, so, like, the sitting in the classroom for extended long periods of
Yeah.
time and
Yeah.
whatever, like, that doesn't resonate with them, and then so it's like, "Okay, let's find alternative learning solutions for that child," rather than being like, "Oh, sit in the corner," or what's going on, and I
Solutions.
use it
Yeah.
in that way. Yeah, so being like, "Okay, instead of you getting in trouble because you said a bad word and you have to, like, sit outside the principal's office, I'm gonna give you a task to do. I'm gonna make you're gonna be in charge of watering the plants for the entire week for that class or for that school." Um, like, if you take time away from the school community, then you have to give time back, right? Like, kind of seeing it that way. Um, but yeah, so essentially using nature and the environment as a tool, as an educational tool, and then going from there. So we do like a lot of like land back education and like yeah, and that is just bringing them to community garden that's on a commercial landscape and saying, okay, plant your plants. put like have an investment here,
Yeah.
community garden, build something here. And yes, you can see the condos being built, X amount away. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for the apple tree that that grows over there, or the milkweed you just planted, or whatever? That doesn't mean that those condos aren't eventually going to take over the community garden space, but at least the children had some time to engage with it, right, and to
Yeah.
understand.
With
And
nature.
yeah, with nature and in the city, right? Because not
Um,
every child has accessible to going in the wilderness.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting that you said whenever you're working with the adult facilitators that
Mhm.
you get them to access their inner child, almost like as if there's always some kind of necessity to like access some part of like a child. Either you're a child or you got to get with
Mhm.
what made you a child in order to understand like your environment and connect with your environment, which is not something I've ever thought about before.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me because sometimes, like our collective friend, I think you know Emma, but my friend Emma used to be a teacher. And then she told me that she was like, "I don't think I was a very good teacher because when I was in school, I got things immediately." So when the teacher first explained to her as a child that she got whatever the concept was, whatever, like the parabolas, whatever,
Yeah.
geometry, whatever it was, she was like immediately like, "Oh yeah, of course." And so when she was in a teaching setting, she realized she was like, when a kid was like, "Oh, I don't understand that." She had
Like,
no other
it's
solution.
over.
Right?
Yeah, yeah,
She
yeah.
didn't she didn't understand. She couldn't, like, be like, "Oh," like, she in her mind, she's like, "Well, why didn't you just get it?" Like, like, which so, for me, I think when I was a kid, I was that kid spaced out always, if there was a baseball game going on, I was in the outfield looking at the grass trying to find
Yeah.
bugs, like,
That's
that's
literally me. Literally me in
right?
the outfield. I literally did that in the outfield, yeah.
Yeah, same. And so it's funny because 'cause I'll talk to my students sometimes, and they're varying ages, but, like, I was such a nerd for animals when I was their age, and
Yeah.
some of them have that and some of them don't, right? Because everyone has different interests, right? But
Yeah.
I just kind of, like, thought universally everybody was just, like, super into nature as a kid but
Yeah.
that's not the case, and
Yeah.
so I just try to give them a little bit of that, at least a little bit where they can kind of and then because sometimes at home, like, a good example is, like, my parents I'm a huge Star Trek fan, my parents have like, could not care less, Um, so maybe at home, their parents are not campers, or their parents don't wanna go out and do on hikes or whatever. So at least if they have some inkling in the school setting of what is it like to be in nature, they can and that resonates with them, they can
Yeah.
go and, continue it themselves because we don't all have the same interests as our family, right?
Yeah.
Um, but
Thank
yeah,
God.
yeah, thank God, right? But yeah, and I try to, like, really what we call, like, in the in the education
Yeah.
biz,
Yeah, yeah.
we call it inquiry-based learning, so it's really asking the students what they want to learn about and then kind of building your curriculum or your activity based on that. So it starts from a question,
Yeah.
that's from the students. So and it could be this big question, right? Like, how does this work? Like, how does the sky work? Or how does whatever, these kind of like huge, usually kind of hilariously philosophical questions. And then
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, and the answer is, I don't know, let's figure it out, you know? Um,
That's so wait, how old are they generally speaking?
Usually I'm with grade 3 to 6. Grade 3 to 6, so we're thinking like 7 to 12 in
Okay.
terms of age, but then I'll do special programs for, high school kids, but that's more like, tangible cooking skills. So, like,
Okay.
like skills that they'll actually use. I call it intuitive cooking, or it's called
Hmm.
intuitive cooking, so you're cooking from
Very fun.
intuition. Yeah,
That's
yeah, rather than
amazing.
following a recipe. Yeah, I love it. It's super fun, and also teenagers are wild, so it's a hilarious,
Do they make crazy
recipe.
shit ever?
it's not even about what they make, it's just how they act, like, it's just so
Yeah.
funny, everything is, like, so weirdly sexually charged because they're
What?
all
In the
they're oh,
kitchen?
not yeah, well, towards themselves, right? Like, because they're just, like, teenagers, they're, like, 16, and so, like,
What
they're
do they do?
playing with each other, like
Oh, they're like, ha ha ha. Like just the way that they act around the kitchen stuff?
yeah, I was telling this story, I can't remember where, but, um there was, like, these 2 boys that are, like, East End Italian, kinda, like, macho guys, and they were
Yeah.
pretending to be husbands while they were cooking, but it wasn't to make fun. It didn't
Like a
seem like
cooking
to make fun.
show? They were like cooking showing it?
Mhm, and
Okay,
it
okay.
no, kind of no, they were kind of like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna make these empanadas for you when you get home from work," and then, like, kind of, like, pretending to be like, husbands,
Okay.
and, like, very domestic, like, kind of like, they were wiping each other's, like, flour on each other's aprons and kind of, like, being super playful, and, they kept on being like, "Miss, we're gay. We're gay, we're gay," together, and I go, "Yeah, that's cool," like, I don't I don't know what
Cool,
you want me to
man.
say about that,
Yeah.
yeah, and then they said it so often that I had to stop and be like, "Okay, so, like, what reaction do you want out of me? I'm not gonna be shocked. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna be angry." Like, I'm like and I was like, "And it's okay if but, just let me know what you want me to say," because they kept on repeating it over and
And
over and over again.
what did you say?
And
I mean,
they were
what did
just
they
like
say?
the kid was just like, "Well, I don't know, maybe I am, maybe I'm not." And I was like, "Yeah, it's okay. You're 16. You're, like, figuring it out." But I was telling them, I was like, "What's so funny though, boys, is that when I was your age, that was an insult. Like, you would never say that I'm gay, you would say somebody else is gay as a pejorative, like, as an
Yeah.
insult." So I was like, "So for me, it's refreshing that you guys are using it in a playful way, and it seems like you both are on board and you guys are role playing this
Yeah.
domestic life that seems okay," I was like, "As
That's
long as
awesome.
nobody gets in trouble and, like, nobody gets, like, physically hurt, I guess you guys could go for it." But,
But
like
it's like genuinely playful, like genuinely
mm,
performing something
yeah,
to like actually
but
figure
with a
something
s
out.
but with a, like, sexual undertone, right? Like, with this kind of,
Yes.
like, pretending to, like, well, I don't know exactly what the euphemism or what they were playing, but, like, well, if you make this well essentially, like, if he cooks what we were making really well, then they're going to have sex later or something, like, along those lines of something silly. But,
Fantastic. Maybe that's
yeah,
how it
yeah.
works like at home. Who knows?
Yeah, I have no idea, but it's funny because these are, like, these students were plucked from their regular class, or it's an
Okay.
alternative school that,
Okay.
like, focuses on the trades specifically. So
Okay.
not like, not to be whatever, but that just not the kids that you would assume that would be playing around with, like,
Hmm.
their
Gender
sexual
identity. Yeah.
orientation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, like,
Yeah.
yeah, like, you think that they would be pretty, like, afraid of it, but no, they were playing around with it. Anyway, which is great. Like, I was like, "That's fine,"
Yeah.
but and they were really into it, the cooking, which I think is good. It's important, that I think is an important skill for everybody, but specifically for these students that are going to have to kind of grow up a little bit faster
Yeah.
because of whatever's going on at home or
Yeah.
whatever. Um, and also, like, being a line cook or working
Yeah.
in a restaurant is a good job,
Yeah.
it's important work and good work, especially for a young person. So if they come to me and I'm able to teach them basic knife skills, and they have, like, a leg up if they're, like, dishwashing and they're like, "Oh, actually, I know what a julienne is and how to dice
Yeah.
something," or whatever.
Yeah. Because you said in a way you started doing this work because of your own fears of the environmental
Yeah.
collapse. Is that like is there fear in children? Like is that something you see ever?
They're more angry, I
Okay.
think, than fearful because ultimately they're not responsible for what's happening, obviously, they just got here, but they're not it's not their fault of what's happening, but ultimately it's gonna be their responsibility,
Yeah.
which is kind of like a really hard pill to swallow? Like, it's
Yeah.
kinda like so that's why for me and I do some, like, activism work with them and stuff like that because it's important when you're teaching kids about these kind of big topics that you always have a part of empowerment to it, right? Or else you're just leaving them with this kind of big question that
Mhm.
can be existential and probably could be really trip them out. Um, but when I tell them about what's happening, I had like one of the times which was really, I guess, like it really brought it home was we were making kits for Open Door Shelter, which is a shelter that mostly works with, or their clientele is mostly First Nations people at Park in Sherbrooke there.
Mhm.
And so we make like toiletries and we put this all together and whatever. And we talk about the reason why we're doing it and the clientele there and whatever. And one of my like 7-year-olds was just like, oh, why are the first people that were here are the ones without homes? And I was just like, buddy, good question, you know? And what's so funny is that the other adults in the room get nervous when things like that, when these kind of like aha moments happen.
Mhm.
And I'm just like, they're like, "Oh, well, blah, blah, blah," and they kind of trying to, "Oh, whatever," and I'm like, "No, let's shut that," like, trying to not shut the other adults out, but be like, "No, that is a very valid question that I
Mhm.
really don't that I have a basic answer to, as we all do."
Mhm.
Um, but, like, he is completely reasonable for wondering that, for thinking
Mhm.
about that. And then you just answer the question as, like, honest as possible within their, level of in like, their intellectual level. So that doesn't mean that you're watering anything down, it's just that you have
Yeah.
to, because sometimes how people say it's like, an apology is more for you than the other person?
Mhm.
It's like, sometimes I feel like with environmental stuff or, like, climate change or indigenous perspectives, it's like the teachers are just trying to get it out. So it's like, "Okay, now I taught you. Okay, I taught it
Mhm.
to you." And without that kind of follow-up where you're like, "Okay, so you said it out loud to them in a classroom. What's the next step? How is he gonna contextualize that?" Right? Like,
Yeah.
how or he or she gonna contextualize that? How is that gonna affect their everyday? So I don't think they're necessarily afraid. I think the older ones, when I talk to them about this kind of, they get angry. They go like, "Why do we have to do this?" I go, "Yeah, okay,
The older
you're right."
kids?
Yeah, they're like, "Why do
Yeah.
we have to be like,
Yeah.
why do we have to do the right thing when there's
Uh-huh.
so many people before us that decided not to do the right thing?" I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure." Like, absolutely. Um, and then again, just bring them closer to nature in a way that's tangible and fun for them too, because it's not like, some of these activities that I look at online, I've been doing this for like 15 years now, and it's like, some of it's like, okay, we're gonna do a compost audit where we're gonna measure our waste, and I don't think necessarily that's a bad thing, like, something to
Yeah.
do, but also, like, we have to make it fun for them. We have to, like,
Yeah.
engage them in a way where they're not, like, looking at the pile of garbage that they created and being like, "And now that's going to a landfill." Like, that's like, I feel like
Yeah.
adults need that more than the kids do. Like, there should be community programs for adults where they have to, like, confront, the amount of waste that they produce or, like, the amount of energy that they use.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like that is like a boring story. And when you talk
That's it.
about the kind of stories that like you need to be able to relate to something and care about it, like if kids only have boring or even just scary stories, like what is that? That's fucking nothing. That's not
Yeah, exactly.
um mm-mm.
And it's just not fair, right? It's
Yes,
not fair to,
totally.
like, burden them with this kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
like, I used to do that a lot. Not a lot, but I used to, like, have, like, all of my stuff about climate change and all this kind of stuff because that's kind of what, like, right now, climate anxiety is, like, a huge thing, and people are
Mm,
trying to study it, and I was, like, talking to these professors, and I was just like, "Okay, let me get something very clear. The children don't have climate anxiety until you tell them
yeah.
that they should."
Yeah.
Right? They're not walking around thinking about roadblocks or fucking Fortnite or whatever the hell they're thinking about, and then also being like, "Oh, I'm worried about the end of the world." Unless you clue them in on what's going on, right?
Yeah.
I was like, of course, you're gonna have 1 or 2 kids that are gonna be thinking about that because that's just, like, how their brain is, that's how they think about it, right? Like, some kids, they have very neat like, one kid I recently was like, "Yeah, I'm really into Australia, post 1950." Great. What was going on? I have no idea.
Like
No
that's what
idea.
they
Like,
brought to you?
Yeah, they just oh, no, I was just asking them because I just like
Oh,
to
okay,
ask
yeah.
them what
Yeah,
they're
what's
up
your
to.
got it, got yeah, yeah.
Yeah, who you listening to, usually
Yeah.
Taylor Swift, Sabrina Carpenter, whatever. And he was like, "Yeah, I've just been watching YouTube videos of Australia in the '50s."
Cool, man.
Yeah, I'm like, "Okay."
That's that's
Just so strange.
fascinating.
Right. Yeah, like,
Um,
I don't know. He's like, "Yeah, the fashion was very interesting." Was it? Couldn't tell me. I have no idea. Like
I mean, it's cool, but it's also something that I feel like, I mean, you're just like very good at because you're, I don't know, a cool person, but just the ability to like sit with like not just like not knowing the answer, but like sit with just really hard feelings that you can't fix for them. Like
Mhm.
whether it's a question about indigenous housing
Yeah.
or the end of the world and being like, yeah, that's a bad feeling and like
And I
holding
think that
space for that.
yeah, it helps because I feel it too, right?
Mhm.
Like, that's, like, another and I think
Yeah.
too, one thing that is super important is, like, to tell kids that you joined them in on that feeling, so it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, because it's like this is about teaching, but in general, like, I'm so over trying to be cool for the like, being aloof and cool and, like, all this kind of stuff and pretend like I don't care
Mhm.
about you know what I mean? It's not like
Yeah.
I'm like, "No, I really care. No, my heart's 100% in it." You know what I mean? And it's hard because sometimes I'll be with my friends and they'll, like, pull out a paper plate or something and be like, "Oh," and I'm
Uh,
like, "I listen, guys, it's very okay. Like, I'm not gonna police your choices in that way, but I just, like I think it's okay to tell kids, like, "Yeah, I'm scared too. I don't really know if there's a solution other than what we're doing right now," which is, like, connecting with nature and talking about how we feel about things, um, and just paying a little bit more attention to the different like, I'm working on a project now where I'm gonna bring a bunch of schools different pepper plants that I've pulled out from my like, I'm calling a micro farm, my big garden there,
your
and they
garden.
have yeah, my garden, because
Yeah.
a lot of the plants that I have, the kids grow them in the school, and then I bring them to my garden, and then I farm for them, and then I
Mhm.
bring them back so that we can cook with it because 'cause they're away in the summer, so it's hard for them to do that maintenance. Um, so yes, I'm gonna bring a pepper plant to a bunch of schools, and it's the job of the students to observe the pepper plant, but then also talk about how it makes them feel watching this pepper plant potentially gonna survive, maybe not gonna survive. It's been pulled out of out of the
Yeah.
ground and put into a pot in a different there's so just like scientifically, it's very difficult for a plant to acclimatize to a different,
Environment.
location,
Yeah.
right? Environment, yeah, and so I want them to kind of essentially feel empathy for this plant through this
Mhm.
process of taking care of it. Um, and then kind of build on that and be like, okay, how is your pepper? Did your pepper plant have any flowers? Like, and really get
Yeah.
for them to take ownership and stewardship over this little plant that,
And
and
then
some of them are going to
maybe
die.
watch it die. If yeah,
Yeah,
do they
exactly.
yeah. And just
And maybe watch it die. And then be okay with that and be like, you know what, I did everything that I could to keep it alive, but sometimes that doesn't happen, you know?
yeah.
Um, which, I've done in many ways before. One time I used to run a nature camp and we killed a bird because it was seizing. It was dying essentially. So we put it out of its misery and then and we all the kids and we all had talked about it. We had this like kind of like kumbaya moment, but one kid went home and told his parents and the parent was like, "No, that's not okay," which is fair. It's a very fair thing.
Is
Then
it
I have
because
like
you
a
killed the bird together?
no, I didn't do it in front of the well,
Okay.
I didn't do it in front of the kids. It was my
Okay.
colleague that
Okay.
like
Okay. Okay.
brought it aside, but
Okay.
then but they all knew what was happening anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
But it was funny because like in our little minds, like the eco camp, we thought that we were doing the correct thing. We had like a funeral for it. We were doing this like
Yeah. I love that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then I got a call from my supervisor and was like, "Hey, I need you to tell me that you didn't kill a bird at camp." And I was like, "I can't tell you that. I definitely did, and
But
I understand." It, like, in the context of, like, a city-run program and then going to camp and then the kid going home and be like,
it's bad
"We
to do
watched a
that?
bird die." Allegedly. I mean, we thought that we were, like, doing the correct thing.
Yeah.
But again, if you don't if you don't spend time with animals and with nature, and it's something that's so far removed from your life, so the idea of, like, us having that funeral and having this, like, connection with this, like, little chickadee or whatever
Yeah.
seems ludicrous, right? Like, it seems insane. I mean, maybe not for you, but for
Not to me,
somebody
but to
else,
somebody,
right? You know
okay,
what I'm
yeah,
saying?
sure.
Like
Yeah.
like, some people truly believe that animals just walk on this planet with no emotion, no feeling, nothing. That's they just are, I don't know what they think, they're soulless creatures wandering around, right? Which again, like, I'm right with you with that face. Like, "What?"
What
But
damage are you doing? I mean, just from the parents' perspective, what do they think? You're like Satanist or something? Like, what's the
I think they're just
fear?
maybe I think a lot of people are afraid to talk to kids about death in general,
Yeah.
and I think that maybe that the parent thought that we were overstepping a little bit of, like, having that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Which was kind of beautiful. We, like, sat around a circle around a fire pit, and we, like, talked about the people in our life who's died, and some people had, like, "Oh, yeah, my fish died," and other kids were talking about their grandparents, and we had this kind of, like, whatever moment, and everyone was kind of nobody was crying, none of the kids were crying. It was all very, like, cathartic in a way. And then the next day, it was funny because I was just looking at the students being like, "All right, which one of you is the narc?" Like, which one?
Yeah, who fucked me up? Yeah, seriously. You're in
It
trouble.
was so funny. It was so funny because the higher boss came in and all of my, like, staff members and I were all, like, nature nerds, and so we were all crying in our disciplinary meeting or whatever because all of us were just like, "You don't understand. Pumpkin was so important to us, and we needed to do what we needed to do," and then she just, like, looked at a bunch of adults in their early 20s, like, bawling, and then she goes, "I don't care that much. I just don't want the parents to call me, so
Sure.
don't do that." It's
Yeah.
like, "Okay."
But
But yeah.
it's so fascinating, and it's also just kind of like a weird, I mean, it's also so natural. I mean, I never thought about it this way, but like if you're a nature person
Yeah.
and death is like such a big part of thinking about
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. I mean,
eh,
with my chickens, like, I've had chickens die in my arms, like, and
What?
that's like an yeah,
How? Because they're
it
sick?
was just it had, a respiratory disease, and we gave it all the stuff you're supposed to give it, but these birds are not, like, made to live very long, right? They're made to really pop out eggs for a few years and then drop dead. Like, that is
Okay.
kind of what they're bred for, because we're
Okay.
not buying, like, purebred heritage. We're just
Chicken.
buying from the
Yeah.
local farmer that, breeds them in a huge farm, and,
Yeah.
and a lot of these chickens end up going to houses where they just have, like, a coop outside, and they have, like, a little bit of a run and whatever, right? Like, that's just yeah, but I that's another thing too, living rurally, because I grew up in Toronto. I have I used to have so many soapboxes that I used to stand on when I was in
Yeah.
university, just like,
Mhm.
one of them screaming about veganism, "I'm not vegan
Mhm.
anymore," one of
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
screaming about factory farming and
Mhm.
monocultures. I live in between 2 monoculture farms, like, whatever, all of these things that I thought that were what was destroying the planet, it's
Mhm.
like monocrops, Monsanto, and these are all big things, and they all are doing it, right?
Yeah.
But then you're faced with, like, the local farmer, Jean-Claude, who lives down the road, who's, like, trying to make ends meet from his family and has a bunch of migrant workers that he needs to pay. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're just faced with more of the reality of what
Mhm.
that means to live a life connected closer to nature or
Mhm.
closer to not being in the city,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
And then you loosen up a little bit. You're like, "Okay," and you see the beauty in it. Sometimes I look at it like, I go and look at the cornfield that I know eventually is probably gonna be made into corn syrup, and is that, like, the most amazing thing? But there's still plants, and that corn provides, like, feed for some squirrels and raccoons and bees and all of these different, like, it creates its own ecosystem, you know,
Yeah,
like, and I'm not like saying that monocrops are amazing, or that like people who keep chickens only in a cage are fantastic, but it's easy for somebody to say that when they're sitting in their, triplex
yeah,
apartment in a city
yeah,
versus someone who lives in that reality, which,
yeah.
I do partially.
But you're telling different stories. I mean, or you, because your experience is growing, you get to tell different
Yeah.
stories, and that's kind of what it's all about, it seems. To just have a
Yeah, just
bigger
learning.
understanding. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Recently, I was asked by, like, a fellow, like, educator, like, "So what was your schooling in?" And I was there to consult over, like, they were gonna call it, like, a sacred garden, which was a problem at from the beginning, because it was, like, a bunch of white people calling something sacred, and I was like, "Alright, what do we" like, that was
What's
the
going on in your
proposal.
creepy garden?
Yeah, yeah, I
No,
was
no, no,
like, "So what
that's
are you talking about?" No, but
yeah,
I know what you mean, it's like, what are we doing? Are we doing, like,
yeah,
True Detective? A
yeah,
bunch
like
of
some fucking weird rituals going on in there.
Right. But what they wanted to do is, like, have cedar trees and sage and
Hmm.
sweetgrass, and I had to tell them, like, "Well, first of all, you gotta get somebody else in here to consult." Like, I'm not gonna be the only person consulting, and also, go away from the word sacred if none of us are elders or none of us are people in that community. Yeah, let's just
Yeah,
call it a fucking garden, you know?
yeah, it's your fucking
Um
yeah.
Yeah, exactly, but, anyway, so this teacher, or she's not a teacher, but she was an educator, she was like, "What's your schooling in?" And I was like, "I'll tell you where I went to school, but I will tell you that the fact that you brought me in here today and what I'm consulting on, I didn't learn any of that in university. I learned it from the farmers around me, I learned it from, like, furthering my own education in, like, indigenous-led, we call it land-based indigenous-led, education, so environmental education, but from the perspective of indigenous people." Um, and from the local people that when I went to Cape Breton and lived there in the pandemic, the local people who live rurally, all of these people are the reasons why I'm able to, like, be confident in this meeting today and be like, "Hey, actually, that's not enough space to plant trees," or "That's
Yeah,
actually you can't plant sweetgrass. In fact, you specifically can't." Like, and these kind of topic or these kind of things. I was like, I didn't learn any of that in university. I learned in
yeah.
university, like, that the world is ending, essentially.
Hmm.
Like, point blank, the world is ending. I just remember, like, watching in school, like, going to U of T, and then all the class, we just watched a documentary on the tar sands in Alberta,
Uh-huh.
and just, like, the before and after aerial shots of, like, this ancient forest, and then the complete annihilation of that forest and built into the tar sands, and I just remember just being like, "What am I supposed to do with this knowledge that it's
Yeah.
happening?"
Hmm.
Because I couldn't stop it, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, what, you know? I
But
don't know.
you knew that you wanted to do something. Like just at that moment, what, in your early 20s?
Yeah, I guess I don't even, to be honest with you, I still thought that I was going to, like, be an entertainer at that point. I thought I was in a band all throughout university, and we were, like, picking up some momentum, nothing crazy, but we were, like, playing kind of bigger gigs, and I was still in theater, and I just was like, I have to go to university because I'm the first person in my immediate family to go to university, so it's, like, necessary to do.
Yeah.
Um, but I wasn't really I thought that was just, like, my personal feelings, you know what I mean? I didn't think that I wasn't, like, charged to do something about it, I was like, "Oh, I'm very upset
Fuck.
about this." You know? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It wasn't the last time I saw you. But the time I think before that, we
Mm.
talked about your stand-up comedy stuff
Oh,
back.
yeah. I
And
just went back for the first time. after 4.5 years. It was
Okay.
last Wednesday. Yeah.
Because you told me when I saw you, you said, yeah, it's what I used to do. I don't do that anymore. There was a
Yeah, yeah,
very
yeah.
kind of intense
Final.
slice off of that part of your life. So, yeah, I mean,
Okay,
this,
this actually ties in perfectly,
yeah,
weirdly. What changed my mind, well, not everything, but what kinda changed my mind is I was watching my friend Eva, who is an animator, she makes animated films, and my partner Carlo, who's a filmmaker, talk about what it means to be an artist and that word and why, one of the Carlo didn't like it, but Eva likes it and whatever, like, he prefers storyteller, whatever. They were just, like, having this kind of discussion at my house, at our house about what it means to be an artist, and then Eva said something that, like, kind of rocked my fucking world. She's like, "Well, we're public servants, right? We're performing a public service as an artist. We are serving the public with our art." Um, that is how I look at it. Like, when I'm making my art, it's for the public to enjoy. So, I look at it that way when I'm creating something. It's like, "Okay, who is this going to serve? And how can I be a civil servant in a way of to let that out?" Or let that out into the world, which I thought was kind of amazing because I never really thought about it that way. I mean, and what is more a public servant than a jester, right? Than like like an
clown,
actual
the clown, of
right?
course. That's what they do. Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why I stopped doing stand-up was because I was just I started and then the Me Too movement happened. So it was like everything switched, changed, and it was like very intense and aggressive and like there was people that I was just meeting and then a day later it was like, "He's an abuser." You know what I mean? Like it was a
Yeah.
very intense like time to be in. And it was like, "Okay, who do I trust? Who do I work with? Who do I" and then I was, like, putting on shows as, like, the token woman because now everybody had to have a woman on their show.
Yeah.
And part of me was like, "I don't give a shit, I just need the time because I'm new at this, and I'm trying to hone my craft." So I would do these shows, but then I would get flack from other female comedians being like, "Why
Yeah.
did you do that show? Like, 5 years ago, so and so did this." And I was like, I don't know, like, I'm just meeting these people.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, like, I have no fucking clue." Um, and then it became overwhelming to a point where I was like, "Okay, either I have to start producing my own shows and vetting every single person that comes up on the stage," which I
And
was
making sure they're
doing.
not like a former rapist.
Right. And then I was like, "Okay, that is so much labor to
Mm.
do," and it kind of feels disproportionate when I'm looking at all of the female or women, promoters or not promoters, producers. I was, like, noticing, I'm like, "Okay," and now, like, all of these women are doing these, like, essentially invisible work, booking and putting together these shows, and then, like, why can't she get off the show and then hop on 3 other shows and do which is
Mm.
what comics are kind of not supposed to, but what comics are to do.
Yeah, it's the
And
process.
then yeah, and then I was thinking about, like, okay, what the next step it would be, like, go to do I have to, like, gig around the States and go to Detroit and work a bunch of shows in, like, Milwaukee and whatever, like, all of these kind of things, and I was like, "I don't wanna fucking do that. I don't wanna do that." And
Yeah.
quite frankly, I think that the work that I do during the day is significant enough that I should be able to do it, right? And
Hmm.
then I was like, "Okay, but then who is" I say this to my students all the time. Sometimes I have to remind myself that I have to take the same fucking advice that I give my students.
Yeah.
I ask my student, I'm like, "If someone's telling you to do something and it doesn't feel right, ask yourself why." Like, if it doesn't feel right at the, like, pit of your belly, you know, ask yourself, "Why doesn't it feel right?" Interrogate that, and it could be that you're wrong, it could be that it is actually right, or,
Hmm.
maybe you don't wanna do it because whatever, you're bored that day or
Yeah.
whatever, but just investigate it. And then I was like, "Why can't I do stand-up and also be a teacher and not want to move to New York or LA
Hmm.
and not" you know what I mean? Like, and does that make my art less valid? Like, does
Hmm.
that make it less, like, valuable? I
Hmm.
don't think so. So now I'm at a point where I'm like, I'm gonna do my little gigs. I'm not going to maybe not immerse myself, but, like, I'm not going to overwhelm myself. Like, I don't think I'm gonna produce a show. Famous last words, like, talk to me in a
Mhm.
month, and I'm gonna be like, "Hey, everybody come to my
Yeah.
show," and I'm, like, sending out
Yeah.
flyers, but, um and yeah, and also too, I'm, like, and my friends James and Kelly asked me to be in a movie, to act in their movie, and I was like, "Okay, I haven't performed in 4.5 years in any capacity, so I need to, like, practice those practice that muscle," kind of use that
Yeah.
muscle. But anyway, so now that I think of it that way, so when I go up on stage and I'm thinking, or when I'm thinking about my jokes, it's not like, "Let me tell this joke so I can make people laugh and I can feel good about myself." It's like, "Let me figure out this joke so that I can get the audience to have some sort of release within their laughter, so they can feel some sort of
Mhm.
joyous moment." And that's why, like, when specifically male comedians used to say to me, "I don't need therapy. I do stand up." I was like, "That's so irresponsible." That's such an irresponsible thing to say. It is
Yeah,
not
it's
your audience
so telling. That's
responsibility.
so
Like,
fucked up. That's so telling. That's fucking says it all. That says it all.
and it doesn't mean that you can't use your trauma in art, obviously. That's literally all
Right.
the art good art is made out of that.
Mhm.
Like, Tig Notaro, obviously, in her special, like, that's, like, basis whatever. I'm not saying that. It's not because Tig Notaro didn't get out of the hospital room and then go on stage and be like, "So I had cancer." You know what I mean? Like, it was crafted, it was worked through, it was, like, thought about, right?
Mhm.
And I think we owe our audiences that.
Yeah,
Um
I think there's something about expecting your audience to do the healing for you, and not doing that difficult work on your own to some capacity, that is dangerous in a lot of
Mhm.
ways.
And people love
And
to go up and riff, and that's fine.
mhm, mhm.
But at some point, you gotta write a fucking joke. You gotta write it. You gotta figure it out. You gotta find something that what you said is funny and that it wasn't just cathartic for you to go up on stage and scream into a microphone about how much you hate your mom or whatever, whatever it is. Like, I don't know, because there's so much funny in hating your mom. You just have to find it. You have to just do that work and find it, you know?
Exactly. And find your
Um,
like why why do you hate your mom in
yeah,
particular? That's it. Just,
exactly.
figure it out. Um,
Mhm.
but I think that it's really um important and kind of huge for you that you found the reason that the permission,
Mhm.
the permission
Yeah,
really to
I
like
think that's
go
it.
back
The permission's
and
like a
just do
good way to
you
frame it.
and whatever.
Yeah, and not have any weird expectations of like, "Oh, if I hit this milestone, then I need to hit
Mhm.
this other milestone, then I need to hit this other." It's like, it's okay. It is okay to
Yeah.
be a hometown hero or a hometown artist,
Yes.
Like, it is
Yes.
okay to be that, and
Yes.
who cares if I'm not gonna be in, like, whatever Judd Apatow's, like, next film? It probably would suck anyway. You know what I mean? Like, who
Sure. Fuck you.
cares? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Actually, Judd, if you listen to this right now, I'm getting
Yeah, he's definitely listening for sure. So, you could still
you need
call
to
us. You
ask
could
and
still call
tag.
us, but whatever.